G'day, Clinton Brett from Diesel Help Australia. This is part 2 of our Diesel Service Advisor training. This is about understanding the customer diesel symptoms. So what we're going to be covering today is establishing the symptoms early, interrogate respectively, reading smoke signals and what is that sound, and ensuring the reliability of your customer's diesel. So about establishing the symptoms early. You've got to understand that you've come from a workshop background where you've been surrounded by petrol mechanics and you've started to understand the important symptoms of what a petrol car may display, and you may be able to relate it to a particular component that's failed just due to your experience in the industry. Now, just like the petrol trained mechanics, they've gained a lot of their experience from years and years of working on the vehicles. Very much like a diesel, okay? The diesel specialists themselves, the diesel mechanics, we too, and myself being 30 years, I'm still learning new tips along the way. But what I have established very earlier on from being mentored by some of the best is to establish what the symptoms are of the diesel. Because I've explained in the first part of the series the difference between a diesel and a petrol is quite significant. So we'd like you to understand more about what the particular symptoms are and how you can relate these to a particular issue on the vehicle, and again confidently explain to the customer the importance of rectifying that symptom straight away so we can get along and get the car running again and with the minimal costs and also the long-term reliability of the vehicle. So as we mentioned, the new challenge is diesel. So how this all starts is when you actually talk to your customer about it. So I like to refer it as interrogation, okay, but we like to interrogate respectively. Okay, so best to do is to avoid using technical terms that you may have read from some sales catalogues as such, and because there's a lot of push for a lot of quick fixes on diesel these days, some quick fix chemicals and these wonder attachments and modifications, but you've got to understand the importance about how they don't actually help the vehicle in the long run. Okay, so avoid using those technical terms, avoid making your own assessment of the problem, okay? Leave that up to the technicians themselves. You can record that information yourself from the customer, record the symptoms, write them down, be very clear and concise about the symptoms, okay? So how you can go about this is we actually have developed our own online vehicle analysis diagnostic sheet. So that is available from our website, which is www.dieselhelp.com.au. That's under our title, under the menu listed as About Us. So you can read about what we do. You can go in there and you can actually download it in a PDF file and keep it on file and print it out for your customer. So when your customer comes in, they book their car in for service and they expect you to find that fault straight away. We know from our experience in diagnosing diesel for many years, especially early days, some of these diagnostics on one vehicle would take months and months of time. Okay, and what we used to do the same thing. We used to take the car away ourselves. The customer would trust us in their own vehicle. We'd take it for a test drive. We'd actually drive it home on the weekend, just to try and save them some valuable time and money when it comes to diagnosing. What you can do though is you can actually give them this sheet, and this sheet will cover things, important questions. We want to know when the fault's actually happening, okay? So what kind of smoke is it blowing? Is it blowing white, blue, black smoke? What kind of sounds is it making? Is there some weird sounds like squealing and rattling and whooshing and whirling noises and clacker and all these different noises? Okay, so conditions when the fault is occurring. Is it happening in morning? Is it a startup issue? Is it a cold start? Is it hot starting? Is it happening under load, at idle, or anything like that? So temperatures. Is it a hot day? Is it a cold day? Is the engine warm? What's the gauge showing on the engine temperature? Okay, so it's very simple things that your customer can help assist you in diagnosing the fault a lot quicker. Simple question, where is the car parked? How does this relate? Well, the guys that have done the diagnostic training, they'll be able to relate to this. But what this relates to is about air in diesel, okay? So air can get into fuel systems. The fuel can drain back overnight. So just a bit of a tip there so if the customer parks the car on a slight angle with the tank lower, there's going to be a higher chance of the fuel draining back. and you can get on top of these symptoms straight away. Therefore, you get on top of the diagnostics a lot quicker. So I'll run through, I'll show you an example of the sheet itself. So on the screen here, you've got all your workshop details there. So as you can see, is it happening in the morning, night, afternoon, evening? Is it happening cold, warm? Is it humid conditions? Is it wet? Okay, some vehicles play up only when it's raining, they give a fault. Okay, what action is taking place? Okay, is the car starting? Okay, is it when it's idling? Cranking, we can refer to that word, that terminology. Again, there's some terminology that may be difficult. You may have to explain. You may have to do noises like I've just done. You may have to use some motions in your hands about everything happening. So is it during coasting? Is it under cruise control? Backing off the accelerator? All these really simple things we like to cover. That again is in layman's terms. So your customer can relate to these problems straight up, and just give them, and you can even give them a sheet per day, get them to tick the day off of the week. Okay, so you might find that the customer's car is having problems starting on Monday morning. What did they do leading up to the weekend? It's a trade vehicle. They drove all week until it got low on fuel, and on Friday they left it over the weekend. He drove his other car on the weekend, he's left it over the weekend, and now it won't start. So you need to find out, what fuel tank level have you got in the car, sir? Okay, it's starting cold. It starts fine at night, not a problem. Okay, so that can just help establish the actual key fault you're trying to look for. Okay, so we find that a very helpful sheet, and it has proven to help a lot of mechanical workshops in the past. They've given it to the customers, and then with the diesel help customers, it also helps us as well. So with the diesel help guys, they can ring me up and they say, Clint, we've got the analysis sheet, we'll email it through to you. I can go through there, and that will help myself establish, and our other partner that helps do the technical advice, we'll be able to pass it on to him and say, hey, there's a bit of a heads up what the fault is. Same time, you can pass it on to your technician as well, and everyone's up to date with what's happening with the vehicle. Okay, so understanding smoke signals, okay, or what we call reading smoke signals. It's now we're not going to get you to diagnose again. Like I said, don't try to diagnose a car for your customer. Leave that to the technicians. But I want you to understand what these smoke actually mean. So, number one, black smoke. Okay, it is. It's not that harmful. In fact, it's quite. I have here established the harmful factors, and it's mostly soot. And a lot of this excessive black smoke will drop to the ground after it comes out of the exhaust system. What black smoke can be is it can be overfueling, but that doesn't necessarily mean the fuel system's given it too much fuel. It could possibly mean there is maybe an exhaust problem. It could have an exhaust leak. It could have a turbo issue. It could have an intake induction leak, okay? Something very simple that can cause black smoke is an induction leak as such. Okay, so it can also occur during a DPF regeneration. Now, if you don't know what a DPF regeneration is, well, stay tuned, because we're going to have that a little bit later on in this series, okay? So a DPF regeneration, what it does, it injects a little bit of extra fuel. The computer demands it to do it, or communicates and instructs it to do it, such thing. It can be driving along the road and the customer could see this big puff of black smoke and go, oh no, I've got a problem with my car. If it's a DPF vehicle and it only happens occasionally and there's no fault and you can't find a fault, then you can kind of assure your customers, say, hey, well, it may not actually be a fault in the vehicle. It could just be this DPF regen happening, but we'll assess the situation and see if there is a problem there. The other smoke is white smoke. Now, I mention this really, really strongly because white smoke is the most deadliest smoke of all. It's what they call nitrogen oxide. It's the most hazardous, and it's what they say are carcinogenic. A carcinogenic relates to a high risk of cancer, okay? So it's important that we get on top of this a lot sooner than later. Okay, so there's a couple of things we'll cover in this series about where white smoke can be actually created just by something you might be doing during the service procedure. Okay, so what white smoke is what we refer to as incomplete combustion. It means that the temperature has been reduced in the combustion chamber, the fuel's going in, but there may be too much fuel going in, too much fuel going in and not enough air going in, okay? So we can get a mixture of issues there, okay? So it's the inability for the fuel to burn correctly. or completely. It's possible it could be an air intake leak as well. So something like injector washers failing, something we cover in a little bit later on, or something with the fuel system failing. Okay, so remember, white smoke is the most harmful stuff out there. Blue smoke, you can all relate to this because I'm sure your petrol mechanics have reported back to you the thing's blowing blue smoke and it smells like oil burning. Okay, so it's practically the same stuff. Oil smells the same when it burns, whether it's diesel oil or petrol oil. Okay, so it can also create incomplete combustion, which will create that white smoke. So you might get a mixture of white and blue smoke together. So it's not so harmful to as such, apart from the white smoke, incomplete combustion, but it is harmful to the engine. If you get too much oil going into an engine, which can be created from a turbo leak, so if you get a turbo failing, the engine oil will fill up to the intercooler and actually go back into the engine. Now that will cause the engine to over rev and completely destroy the engine, and could actually get to a point where it over revs while the customer's driving along and they cannot shut it down. So that could become a much more dangerous situation. So if you've got a diesel engine that's leaking excessive oil out of the turbo and go back to the intake, you need to be really, really tough with the customer and say, look, really don't advise you to drive it any further. We need to leave it with you. You need a further investigation to eliminate what the possibility is that problem, where that oil's coming from. So what does that sound? Okay, sounds can be difficult to describe, particularly if you're not good at impersonating sounds. Okay, so we can do a bit of a whistle, we can do a bit of a whooshing noise, or a clacker, or a trrrr, sounds like a drum roll, sounds like a jar. Okay, sounds like you're holding a jar full of nuts and rattling around a jar with nuts, or a tin with ball bearings in it. Okay, so they are actually very helpful sounds. You could actually probably put together yourself a bit of a musical band of diesel sounds. So your customer, you've got to be aware that your customer will be aware of these sounds more than you. So your customer's driven the car, quite often customers own their cars for quite a while. If there's a customer with just bought a new car or bought a second-hand car, they may not be familiar with the sound. So you've got to be really vigilant about, maybe even go out for a drive with them and say, let's go for a drive, let's listen to this sound. Okay, so just be aware, but also other sounds that can be produced. Now, we're talking about diesel turbos, okay? So there's most of the diesel your customers are going to own are your late model common rail diesel with turbos. Turbos, now have come from a car without a turbo, possibly. More than likely, they've come from a petrol car into a diesel turbo. They notice that the actual vehicle has got this loud squeal noise. Now, a turbo is quite loud and can be whistly, and that's where you need to establish, is it the turbo or is there another fault there somewhere? So try not to jump the gun when the customer says, oh, it's getting really loud, and it's like a squealing noise, and whatever you do, don't get to jump in the gun and say, yes, well, hang on, it sounds like your turbo's failed, because that sound can be very distinctively sounded like a leaking exhaust system or a leaking intake system. Okay, so ask the customer at the same time. You can establish two symptoms at once with that squeal. Ask the customer, is it blowing excessive black smoke when it squeals at the same time? Is there any abnormal feeling about the car? Does it lose power? Do any weird things okay at the same time as the smoke? Again, that's where that evaluation sheet really comes in handy. Does the engine misfire? Okay, misfire can also create smoke. Ask the customer, what colour smoke is it blowing? So for instance, like blows lots of blue and white smoke and it rattles. That's quite a common problem on a lot of diesel Hiluxes, okay? But also a couple of other vehicles do the same thing. What's happening is the injector washers leak, the oil runs down past the injector washer, goes into the engine, and therefore burns oil, creates incomplete combustion and blows a lot of smoke and black smoke, okay? So just capping off the rest of this session, this part 2 of the series, we want you to ensure the reliability of your customer's diesel. Some key points to be aware of, okay? An exhaust manifold leak can lead to bigger problems down the track, such as excessive fuel economy, poor fuel economy I should say, excessive black smoke. You can have low power performance. These are things you get your, encourage your technicians to inspect during servicing. Servicing is not about just dropping oil in filters and changing filters and checking tyre depths and brake depths. It's about looking around the vehicle for particular problems. Lift up the bonnet, get the mechanic to have a good look around, inspection. Even in some cases where you've got an exhaust and it's blowing excessive black smoke, and you may actually have to get them to remove the covers, okay? So we're talking about the heat shields over the exhaust system. A lot of leaks can be present there just by looking around for a bit of black carbon and soot where it shouldn't be. Shouldn't be any black soot or carbon around the exhaust where it connects to the cylinder head, so they're a key problem there as well. Intake pipes. Check the intake pipes themselves. Are they excessively leaking oil? Now, before you jump the gun and go and throw a plastic catch can or a steel catch can, or in general a catch can on there, just be wary that if there's oil excessively leaking, a diesel will emit a lot of oil through the intake system as standard running. It's not a bad thing to have excessive oil running through. It actually could be a normal amount of oil for that engine. Okay, just because one car has an oil problem and the other hasn't, doesn't mean the one car with the catch cans fix the problem. It could actually be masking an underlying problem. One of the underlying problems with diesels blowing a lot of oil out is where injector washers fail. They cause a high positive crankcase ventilation. That pressurizes the system, that pushes more oil vapor out into the intake, recirculates it. It's good to have oil recirculating, it keeps the turbo lubricated, okay? So just be wary about the oil leaking. The other thing is that over time, rubber doesn't last forever. It's probably got a lifespan these days around about 5 to 7 years. So you need to understand that the oil is probably soaking those rubber hoses over time, and all you got to do is replace the rubber hoses to solve the problem. Valve clearance adjustment are very important. Okay, so these faults or these adjustments and serviceable items, these will reduce smoke, noise, and improve fuel economy, improve performance, and number one, improve your vehicles, your customers' engines' reliability. Okay. So I'll just show you a bit of a picture here of a very common overlooked service item, which is the air induction pipes on a Mercedes and Volkswagens. So quite a number of these where they actually leak the seal rings. Okay, so Mercedes and Volkswagen recommend to replace them every 80,000 kilometres. It's a piece of rubber, it's not going to last forever, so even if you don't have the service information, you must be aware that rubber won't last forever, and these are simply easily replaced. Okay, so rubber sleeves like these, okay, these O-rings here and these sleeves that go around the induction pipes, okay, they eventually become saturated with oil. So like I said before, the rubber doesn't last forever, and the oil soaks into the rubber, becomes very soft and becomes unsealable. Okay, so you just need to replace the seals. Don't go and replace seals and then put a catch can on it. Okay, so I'm not saying catch cans are bad, but keep this in mind, because that's also another subject we'll be covering a little bit later on in our series, is about modifications. Are they really worth it? And how valuable are they to the car, or are they going to create another problem down the track? Okay, so that wraps up part 2 of the Diesel Service Advisor. We look forward to seeing you again soon when we release part 3 of the series.